Welcome, everyone, to the ninth episode of the PlainGains podcast. Today, we have a special guest, Joe Lacerra, with us. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience?
Thank you guys, first and foremost, for having me on the podcast. For those who don't know who I am, my name is Joe Lacerra. I am a natural pro bodybuilder holding a professional status with several different organizations. My best title that I've won, competitively speaking, in 2020, I won the Mr. America title in the Classic Physique division. I've competed actually in all three men's categories coming up in the competitive world: men's physique, classic physique, even dabbled in bodybuilding as well. Winning professional status in all three. So pretty expansive competitive history. And then in conjunction to that, occupationally speaking, I am a both in-person personal trainer and an online coach for both contest prep, Gen Pop, and for posing as well.
That's awesome. Yeah. So we kind of wanted to just get in because I don't know. Have you ever been on a podcast before?
I have a couple times, but not to any extensive bits here. So do your worst.
Right. So we just kind of wanted to get to know you a little bit, starting from your roots. So how and what really got you into fitness and what started your fitness journey?
So I guess the cliff notes for all that, what started me in my fitness journey was martial arts growing up. I feel like every bodybuilder or bodybuilding competitor that we see in the space now was, once an athlete or did some sort of martial arts, some sort of physical activity growing up. And, kind of once that reaches its course, we usually find ourselves in the weight room training to get better for said sport. And then that's where bodybuilding kind of takes off. But my background is in martial arts. I held at the highest rank a 4th degree black belt, which is a master black belt in Tung Soo Do. Started at age 5, trained for about 15 years until age 20. And it was one of those things where life kind of got in the way and martial arts sort of fell by the wayside. And I would say I probably began training in that high school, range 15, 16, just in terms of, gaining size. For me, I was always the skinny, small kid growing up. So for me, it was just about always putting on more mass so that I could be stronger. It was never an issue of, speed or that with martial arts. It was, I need to, compete with some of the bigger boys. And from there, it was just falling in love with the process of weight training. And, like I said, when martial arts kind of fell by the wayside around age 20 or so, that's when bodybuilding really sort of took hold. And that's when I sort of found my way into more of the competitive setting, if you will.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think you're definitely on something with the athlete stuff. For me, it was lacrosse. I'm not sure what it was for you, Juan, but I'm sure you had something. It's either that or they were out of shape originally and wanted to get in shape, so they went into the gym. But there's definitely a huge dichotomy between playing sports and training for strength and then eventually training for bodybuilding or whatever, and then taking the leap to step on stage. So how did you go from training for bodybuilding after you were done with martial arts and getting into finally stepping on stage for the first time?
So the stage was something that had been in the back of my mind for a couple years, because being more from the other side. So you spoke with respect to the person that maybe was, in an out of shape state that found the gym to get themselves in shape. Being the skinny kid, I was always really lean and really ripped growing up, but it was just, you need more muscle mass. So I had a few people at the gym, kind of tell me about competing or tell me you should think about competing. And, there were some resources, starting to pop up. This is 2016 now. So obviously social media is prevalent, but not nearly the presence that it is now, where it's pretty ubiquitous everywhere, where you can find, resources, sometimes a little too much information, but that's a whole another side topic. So between people telling me that, hey, maybe you might be all right at this, to then me just doing my own kind of research and finding things out. And although it wasn't spoken about as much, I had to do a little bit of digging to find it. And now I'm thankful we don't have to do as much digging to find it. I found, tested organizations, which was really great for me because, from a health perspective, I don't judge anybody that, wants to use enhancements, but it's something that I will never personally do. So when I found out that there was tested events, that was something that really interested me. And it was something where I just said, I'm going to go for this, because why not? There was really that why or why not, and there was no reason not to. So I decided to dive in and made a ton of mistakes along with that. So I'm sure we'll speak to a few of what those were so that we can help guide the first time competitor that's listening to this down a better path than I went on for sure.
Yeah, no, that's actually an excellent segue into my next question. So let's say we have some person, actually, we can just use me or somebody else for an example, doesn't matter. And they've never competed before and they're interested in competing and they're relatively novice. Let's say, I don't know, maybe 3 to 4 years of training. How would you go about getting them ready and both mentally and physically ready to compete on the bodybuilding stage, whatever division, doesn't really matter, unless there's differences that you want to point out?
Sure thing. So I guess as far as the blanket statement goes, and I have to say this, obviously there's some bias attached because I'm a coach for a living and it's what I do. But I think if you are a first time competitor, I think it is really vital that you find a coach not only who has maybe a little bit of a pedigree, who at least knows what they're doing, who has also walked the walk themselves down that path. So, there's always discussions about a coach. Is it necessary that they have competed themselves? And to me, I think that's an absolute yes when it comes to bodybuilding. I think you had to have walked that line because you touched on it briefly by saying not just the physical, but the mental component of competing, how really with just the rigidity that a contest prep environment has, you need somebody who can help navigate that from a mental perspective so that the athlete doesn't just crumble under that circumstance, because it really is unlike anything you can put yourself through. I always give the analogy when it comes to other sports where you go to practice and you work on your skills and things like that, and then you go home and you may think about it a little bit, you may watch game tape or this or that. Bodybuilding's a little different because from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, and even sometimes in your dreams, you're thinking about stepping on stage. When it comes to your nutrition and your training and your hydration and your recovery, it is something that just is a running clock in your brain 24/7. And if you don't have somebody in your corner that can help sort of manage those, first of all, manage your expectations, but then manage the process as well, I think you're really doing yourself a disservice. And that's one of the biggest mistakes, I think, looking back on it, is in the beginning, I really should have hired somebody who knew what they were doing to help me down that path. Now, luckily, through my own education and now anecdote of making a ton of mistakes, I have learned a lot along the way. But I feel that maybe I would have got a more fast track if I had been able or fortunate enough to hire somebody that knew what they were doing to help steer me down that right path, as to not make a lot of those rookie mistakes, so to speak.
No, yeah, that definitely makes sense. So let's go back to this example. Let's say we have someone and they're not like super obese or anything like that. They're relatively out of shape. I wouldn't say out of shape. They have like slight resemblance of abs or whatever, and they want to step on stage in however long amount of time. How many weeks do you think it's going to take this person, and what sorts of diets and training protocols do you think would be best for this person if they wanted to step on stage for the first time? And what sorts of tips would you be giving them mentally as they go along that prep route?
Gotcha. So we'll break that down kind of one facet at a time there. So
Yeah.
looking at time frame first and foremost, I am happy now with the current standpoint of a longer contest prep being better, solely from the standpoint of, yes, physiologically speaking, the more body fat you have on your frame, the more time you're going to need to diet. That's just thermodynamics. It's pretty simple. Everybody can figure that out. But the aspect of having a longer contest prep that I think people don't take into account is just the stuff that can get in your way in life. And the more external stressors that you have, the more likely it is that stuff is going to get in the way. And that's life. We want bodybuilding to harmonize with life, not dominate it. So, if you have a stressful job, if you have, a spouse or a partner, you have kids, you have other obligations, all those things need to coexist, because those things aren't going to get put on hold for your bodybuilding show, nor should they. So being able to have enough time to account for those bumps in the road, because obviously an experienced competitor may be able to handle those challenges a lot better, whereas, a new person might not, have the right strategies for prepping ahead of time, or, being able to figure out their macros on the fly, or being able to adjust their training split or adjust their cardio regimen to fit a different week. So now kind of segueing into that, training and diet protocol, obviously, it is going to be person dependent and sort of life dependent as far as how many days a week can you train. So I don't think there's one perfect approach when it comes to training. I know you guys speak on this all the time, when it comes to training, that there really isn't like a perfect split or a perfect thing that you can follow. It's really going to come down to your life. And especially managing a contest prep, we need to think about something that is long-term feasible. Because a lot of people, when they start a contest prep, they want to come out of the gates full sprint. And I love that determination. I love that people have the energy and they're ready to do it, because that's when you're most motivated, is when you're right about to start a contest prep. Of course, you're in your most highly motivated state at that point. You're saying, I'm going to do this. My show's in 16 weeks. I got this. We're going to go full steam ahead. And then stuff happens. Your car breaks down. You have, a family member, God forbid, that gets sick. Like, stuff is going to happen. That's Murphy's Law. If it can happen, it will. So it's understanding that your training has to fit your life in terms of how many days a week can you train. All those things considered have to sort of fit and mesh. When it comes to nutrition, that also has to fit life as well, and also fit the individual. So I find when it comes to nutrition that there are some personality differences there. And that's been a big one that I like to figure out with each person, who they're like. So take me, for example, even in my earlier stages in bodybuilding, I've always been a meal plan guy. It's because I enjoy not having to think when it comes to food. So I'd rather create a meal plan based on current macros that I want to hit. So kind of backtracking, it always starts with, a baseline of calories, baseline of macros per what we feel that individual needs from an energy balance perspective to get them to start losing body fat. So obviously that's based on their intake and all things considered there. But once we have that, are they more of a if it fits your macros athlete, where they want that freedom to be able to adjust on the fly or incorporate different things in? Or are they more of that they just want to be told what to eat? They want to, prep their chicken and rice ahead of time and go about it. And I think that nutrition discussion is very similar to the training discussion. Are they more of a fan of a bro split style of training? Because one aspect of both nutrition and training we need to look at, especially in a long-term adherence perspective, is enjoyment. So is the person going to enjoy this long-term? If they enjoy more of a bro split style of training, then that might be what leads them to the promised land. Or if they enjoy an upper lower split, I don't really want to steer them from that. Obviously, I'm going to make sure their volume parameters are okay and that they're, not overdoing it. But it's making sure we set the plan that the individual can execute and maintain, because the best plan in the world poorly executed is worse than, a maybe suboptimal plan that's executed to a T. I'd rather the person that can check all the boxes than we have this perfect plan on paper, but we score 50% on checking the boxes. That's not going to work.
Right. Those are actually really excellent points that you brought up there. And I just want to shed light on the fact that a lot of people think that prep is something that is completely rigid for everybody, and there's not a lot of flexibility with how you can go about prepping. But like you just said, it's definitely not as rigid as people may think. You have a lot more flexibility in the style of training that you can do, the style of diet that you can do. And really the only consistencies are that you are going to be training and you are going to be in a caloric deficit. And all the rest of the stuff can just be kind of what works best for you, what you like to do, and what you can be consistent with. So those are really good points.
Well, one
Absolutely.
thing I do want to bring up about the meal prep is that a lot of people think, at least the people who I'm familiar with or that I've heard of, they think that meal planning can be very expensive at times. Do you have any comment on that? Do you think it could be cheaper than regular, I guess, buying a regular groceries, going to the grocery store and getting a regular cart or whatever? Or do you think meal planning can get a little more expensive on some times between the competition or so?
So I think it depends on the ingredients that you're using, first and foremost. One point to that I know in particular is that my food bill as a whole goes way down when I contest prep, because I do buy more things in bulk, because for me, being more of the meal plan oriented person, since I'm eating more of the same foods day to day, because again, going back to it, that's what I enjoy. I'd rather not switch things up. I'd rather keep things, and even in my off seasons, I keep things pretty consistent day to day. Obviously, I'm a bit more loose when it comes to, maybe an off plan meal here and there, but I'm still that way in an off season setting, just because it's what I enjoy. It's easiest for me to batch cook things. So, but my bill goes down because I'm not eating out nearly as much. In an off-season setting, maybe, the wife and I go out to a dinner here and there. Now that we have the baby, not as frequent, but we may order food in or something like that, because, in an off-season setting, maybe I'm 85 to 90% on the consistency button. Whereas contest prep, I think, while we do have a lot of flexibility, as Jack kind of touched on, when it comes to what food sources we use, what types of training protocol we have, the thing that I think people need to realize in the contest prep setting is there's no room for error at that point. And that's why, speaking back to the timeline, we do account for a little bit longer of a contest prep, because while we don't want any error, stuff is going to get in the way. So we have to account for life, jumping in and maybe derailing us a little bit. But as far as our adherence to the plan goes, we want that to be as close to 100% as possible. And that's why setting up a plan that's going to work for the individual makes more sense than making the perfect plan.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And I think that honestly, the food can be much less expensive. One, because like Joe said, you're eating less, so it should be less. And as long as you're eating foods that aren't, so one way that you could kind of trap yourself into eating more expensive foods is if you don't eat any fruits and vegetables that are fresh when you're bulking, and then you start your contest prep and you go all in on the fresh fruits and vegetables, then it might raise your bill a little bit. But the frozen fruits and vegetables are cheap. Bulk rice is cheap. Bulk potatoes is cheap. Frozen meat is cheap. So I think there's definitely a way to do it if you're in the confines of some sort of budget. I would say probably the less budget friendly part of competing is not the food, but rather the actual competition, the travel, the other types of fees that are involved in that. So I'm sure Joe knows
that can
yeah.
get very expensive.
Yeah. So back on the your own experience competing, you said you've done and made a lot of mistakes, and I'm sure a lot of people have made those exact same mistakes as you. So what sorts of mistakes have you made in the past in your competitions, and how can other people avoid making those same mistakes?
So I actually had this conversation with one of my contest prep clients a couple days ago. So this is going to tie in really nicely. Contest prep is somewhat of an orchestra of knowing just how hard to push the human body without pushing it over the edge. So I've seen and I've done both of the two wrongs on the other sides of those. So speaking to not digging hard enough, we'll get a lot of athletes, and I've had a few myself, that will diet for a week or two and then say they need a cheat meal because they need to boost their metabolism, whatever reason they try to justify in their brain that they need to go get a burger and fries. They will try to justify it to themselves. And that's where it takes me as the coach to say, no, you don't really need a cheat. You want a cheat meal, but you don't really need one here. You're just trying to justify it to yourself to have that. Now, come to the flip side of that, where you have an athlete that is willing to eat 800 calories of dirt and run through a brick wall. I also have one of those on my roster right now as well, who she would literally do whatever it takes. In that sense, if I told her, like I said, you have to eat dirt and run through a brick wall, she would do just that. And that's obviously not good either, because that will tip you way into the wrong side of the recovery scale when it comes to a contest prep, because it's not what you can do, it's what you can recover from. And yes, in a contest prep, you do live in a constantly slightly overtrained and underfed state, but it's about riding the red line, because if you do tip that too far, we see a lot of physiques either waste away from a physical perspective, where you talk about people actually losing muscle tissue if the deficit is too great and the person is doing too much volume in the gym and excessive cardio, anything to the extreme is not good. So you'll see a lot of people with, really tired physiques on stage, or if they even make it to the finish line at that point. I've seen people, give up on preps because they basically dug themselves a hole they couldn't get out of. So when you look at a deficit scenario, it's about digging just enough of a hole to keep tunneling through, but you need to be able to get out of the hole as well. So it's about, like I said, knowing just how hard you can push, but then still be able to pull back, whether it's in terms of a deload on training or using strategic refeeds, diet breaks, things like that, which also play into the timeline of your contest prep. So now that's another thing that may add a little bit of time to your contest prep if you do need to incorporate those things like diet breaks into the equation, where you do take a week and chill out at around maintenance calorie levels just to give your body a little chill pill. Well, that's a week now not losing body fat. Now, granted, that week may have a benefit in terms of, you losing a little bit of systemic inflammation because you're just chilling out a little bit. So you might feel and even look a little better on the back end of that, but that's still a week not losing body fat because you're not in a caloric deficit anymore. So at least for that week. So you need to find that line. And like I said, I've done both of those. I've been the guy that after 3 days, I need to go have a refeed because I felt like I needed it. And I was too flat. I was just too fat, sorry to break it to you. And then I've been the other guy where I've looked back at stage pictures and gone, God, if I only just backed off a little bit, I wouldn't have looked so emaciated and so just like wasted away. Like I just looked tired on stage, and that's not, we want a nice, full lean muscle, and it just wasn't it. So it's really knowing that fine line and every athlete's different as far as that goes. Some athletes can handle more. Everybody's protocol is going to be a little different, but it's about being receptive to those things and, being in communication. If you are working with a coach, being in very close communication with them so that they know what's going on, not only performance wise in the gym, but they just know what's going on between the ears as well.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it brings up one of the things that I like to talk about a lot, and that's the duality of being a coach. Whether you have to coach a client with an iron fist and you need to be real with them and say, you're not lean enough, and you need to diet harder, or you need to get back on track, or whether you need to be more lackadaisical with potentially a Gen Pop client who is really just in there to improve your health. It's the duality of coaching where you have to mold yourself into the correct type of coach for the individual that has approached you for coaching. So I think that's a really good point. And I've also definitely witnessed what you're talking about with some of the people that I know, where they dig themselves. Actually, the rate of digging is way too fast in the beginning. And then they get 8 to 10 weeks into their 20-week prep, and then they're just done because they're not losing any weight anymore, because their body doesn't move at all. They've lost all of their non-exercise activity thermogenesis, unfortunately. So definitely.
Well, I think it's really important that you brought the fact that people try to convince themselves to do something that they want to do, even though they know they shouldn't. They try to find like different ways around it, and it's funny because I actually I watched a show called Barry on Max, or HBO Max or Max, and like literally yesterday it was just him. He's a bounty hunter, and well, he's religious and he doesn't want to kill, but he does want to. So he just keeps listening to podcasts of priests getting closer, closer, finding an excuse for the reason to him do the justice that he wants to do. And until he finds the interview with the priest that says it's okay to do it, he goes, all right, that's it. Stops it. And it actually made me think to myself, I was like, well, I think this is something that a lot of people do. Sometimes I do when just dieting, not even for competition. It's like, oh, I'll have a cupcake or something. Like there can't be a reason. And then I find something online where it's like, no, you shouldn't eat junk food all the time or something. It was like, oh, but whatever you eat, you burn calories as you eat that because your body has to digest that. So I'm like, oh, well, I burn calories eating. So it's, even though the cupcake is like 280 calories, it's not really 280 calories. So I'm eating a little less than I think I am. And then it's like little things like that where people just get carried away, and then they don't, and then it kind of just like breaks that arc of consistency. So I mean, I think that's one reason why people kind of break diets or give up sometimes too easily.
Yeah, I mean that goes on the ultimate hack of if you're hungry, just eat boiled overcooked chicken and you won't be hungry anymore, because you won't be able to eat it and you'll burn too many calories chewing it. So Not
It's
so
one way
great
to
of a
do it.
hack. Yeah. That's good. So, I do want to touch on something that I get asked a lot and something that I don't have the best knowledge on. So I wanted to ask you, and that was kind of how do you go about taking a new athlete um, through contest prep, particularly focusing on peak week? Like, do you practice peaking somewhere prior to the contest prep, during the contest prep? And what is your peak week protocol for your different athletes and yourself look like?
Sure. So obviously, peak week, in my opinion, is probably the most overhyped and overblown concept in the competitive fitness world. So yes, there are all kinds of water manipulations and sodium manipulations and things like that that one could do, and people do them, and some people have success with them. When it comes to my peaking approach, I definitely take more of the minimalist route, because my sentiment stands that if we look great in the gym 1 week out with a pump, why are we gonna mess with anything, and why mess that up? Now, that's obviously predicated on the fact that you look ready to go 1 week out. So when it comes to testing peak protocol, let's address that first. I will use some data from, hopefully, we've had the opportunity to introduce refeeds with this client, where we do have either 1 to 3 day stretches of higher carbohydrates, sometimes higher fat intake, depending on the individual. Or if it's a longer contest prep scenario, as I touched on earlier, maybe we have the chance to do a full week-long diet break where we spend a week to 10 days even at a maintenance level. I've even seen diet breaks go as long as 14 days in some facets in a really extended contest prep. So in a first-time competitor, though, speaking truly to your example, that person really isn't going to get to their leanest potential on the first go. And that's no indictment on the competitor or the coach. It's just that you don't know because you haven't been there, sort of thing. But usually they start to really nail that as they go down the road. But speaking on that first time athlete again, hopefully we've had the chance, like I said, to use some of those refeed days where we have higher carbohydrate intake, and we can assess a physique in terms of where it looks best post that slightly higher intake. Does it look the best the day of? Does it look the best the day after? Does it look best 2 days after? These are all things we'll pay attention to, because different people have different saturation levels, as how quickly they turn over food and what it does to their gut and different things like that. And when we look at those higher carbohydrate days, they're nothing fancy. I usually instruct people to just eat more of the foods they've been eating, because from a digestion perspective, we want to keep things pretty chill there. So we don't want to start introducing a bunch of new foods. Now, when it comes to peak week, let's say in this hypothetical scenario, the person is where we want them a week out. It's like, okay, you look really good in the gym on Saturday, the week before the show. Now, how do we mimic your best look in the gym to show day? So a couple things that you can look at there are estimated times when you would be on stage. Now, obviously, that is a shot in the dark, because there's been very few bodybuilding shows in my career that have started exactly on time. Promoters, you know who you are, you know who have done good and who have done really poorly there. But that's neither here nor there. So usually the show will give out some kind of schedule in their emails to the competitor, as far as, okay, we're going to run, bodybuilding first, then classic physique, then we're going to do women's figure, then we're going to do this class. We'll work together to try to time out within maybe an hour or two when this person's going to be on stage. Now, that's going to be sort of our test mimic. It's like, okay, if we need to get on stage at noon, we need to figure out how to get your best look around then. So does that come after one high carbohydrate meal? Does it come after, having higher carbohydrates the day prior, and then the secondary days? That's where we'll kind of look back to the refeed data and say, where did this body look the best? And then sort of work backwards from there. So, and we'll do that with respect to our timeline on the show day side of things. Now, when it comes to peak week in general, like I said, I do take more of a minimalist approach. And obviously, when it comes to peak week, the athlete's then checking in daily rather than once a week. So even in a contest prep scenario, my clients all check in weekly. But once peak week comes about, it is daily, whether they're just sending me body weight and pictures. It might be a more abbreviated check-in, but I'm looking at things more closely because we may need to make more subtle adjustments when it comes to food because we're trying to mimic that best look. And, I look at it in the sense of just like a moving target, right? So we have that window of stage where we think we're going to step on stage, and that's a floating target. And all I'm trying to do is just put the arrow as close as I can to the bullseye. And the more data that we have throughout the contest prep, the better we're going to be able to take aim at that spot. When it comes to all the variables, again, I touched on the carbohydrate factor. That's going to be down to the refeed data that we gather. Water and sodium are two variables that often get juggled around a lot, doing water cuts or sodium loads, then you drop sodium and all this. Again, I like to keep things fairly consistent in the sense of if we look great a week out in the gym, with using normal salt and normal amounts of water, why are we going to screw with it over here? Because while it may have the chance to make you look 5% better, we could also look 50% worse, because what carries those carbohydrates into the muscle cell? Water and sodium. Mm-hmm. Those are the two things that help us transport those carbohydrates. So if we start playing with those while we're maybe eating a little bit more carbohydrates, they're not going to go anywhere, and they're not going to do what we need them to do and actually load them into the muscle efficiently. So we're going to keep sodium and water in. I feel like the people that always want to do the water cuts, they're trying to do it as a last ditch effort to make themselves leaner when they just should have taken more time to prep or pick a show at a later date. And they're screwing with those things to try to, make last minute improvements. And there will be people that probably do have water and sodium manipulation protocols that work, just like we touched on earlier with training and nutrition. Somebody might be on a bro split and it works for them, and somebody might be on an upper lower split and it works for them. I genuinely think peak week planning is exactly the same. There's no magic formula. It's what we feel works best for the athlete. And also every coach has their tendency. Like I said, I'm more of a minimalist, conservative approach when it comes to peaking, where some people have drastic protocols when it comes to and as long as the athlete is able to get lean enough, usually both of those approaches will work. But my goal is just to land the plane, so to speak. So if the runway show day, we need to get there, we're trying to just land that plane as smoothly as possible. We don't want to start pulling on a bunch of levers as we're bringing that puppy in for a landing. I'd rather just land it nice and smooth.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I've heard, I don't remember who exactly said this, but somewhere I heard that pretty much if you aren't even lean enough, the peak is not going to do anything. It's not going to make you any better, and it has the potential to make you worse. So if you're not lean enough, you're better off just taking that last week to diet more. And if you are lean enough, that's good that you're ready early, and minimal things might make you a little bit better, but it's not going to be anything ultra dramatic, especially for a natural.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that, I guess, well, I had a question too. We had a question coming up, and I think this leads pretty well into it, of what goes on backstage before the competition. And I've heard many things. A popular one would be that some bodybuilders like to actually take some shots because it dehydrates them a little bit. I don't know if that's
hate
true.
that that's still around. I really do. I hate that that's still there.
I don't even know where I heard that from, but and then that's like a huge thing, and people would think that, and then they would just take shots to look leaner before the beach, and I'm like, well, even if that would work, you're not even lean enough for that to happen.
No, that's so funny because I just got a DM asking me about that, and they were like, if I'm going to go to the beach and I want to look as lean as possible, how many shots should I take? And I'm like, dude, you're like 18% body fat. You're not going to look any different if you take shots. You're just going to look worse because you're going to hold more water.
You're probably not gonna end up going to the beach.
Yeah, that one irks me so bad to my core. It really does. Oh.
But in general, what would happen?
Backstage, I have seen a lot of different stuff, from everything to people taking shots to people eating all kinds of weird food and this and that. So let's address, I guess, the food side of things first, or what we're ingesting. For starters, please, people, if you're out there, don't do the alcohol thing. It's not safe. It's your body's in a very lean, compromised state probably, and then you're going to introduce a substance in there that has the ability to impair motor function while you're standing on a slick stage because everybody's glazed up. Please don't do this. This is just a PSA. Don't do that. Um, people will say it will dry you out, and again, it goes back to those, you're trying to do last minute manipulations for work you should have done for the last 20 weeks or so. So again, all that drastic voodoo-y stuff isn't gonna do anything for you. You're just justifying it in your brain. But when it comes to food, we look at, kind of speaking on what I was looking at before in terms of where does a physique look the best, that also comes down to like that last meal that they would have before stage as well. So I'll have people keep that fairly similar to maybe what they would normally have. Now, I will maybe introduce some quote unquote drier foods in this case, where you may see people switch to rice cakes, and that's a pretty popular backstage item. Simply because it's a little bit drier than rice in the sense of you may not get as much natural water retention from it or as much water pulled into the gut. So that's why people would use like a drier food like a rice cake. And simply they're easier to transport backstage as well, rather than like rice or other carbohydrates. So that's why you see rice cakes being pretty popular. You will see some people, and I've had some minor success with this as well, use some sugary carbs, right before stage. The Reese's Cups, the candies, this and that. It works to the extent of, okay, you have some sugar and it's very fast acting carbohydrates. But for me personally, I find that those things just kind of, unless you time them exactly right, they end up still kind of percolating around in your gut because, let's be honest, the meal that you have pre-stage, let's say it's, a small serving of protein and some rice cakes with some peanut butter, let's say. It's pretty common. That meal is not the meal that's inside of your muscles right now, because that meal is still going to be working its way through your gut when you're on stage in an hour and a half. That meal is not going to be fully digested yet. That meal is basically to hold you over to go on stage. So I think people misappropriate carbohydrate timing in the sense of, I've seen people eat a crap ton of stuff backstage in the effort to load carbs when that should have happened already. That should have happened Wednesday, Thursday, maybe a little bit on Friday, but Saturday is just kind of keeping you at baseline. That's just holding you steady so that you don't have any hypoglycemia on stage, because if the body is lean, it will turn over food pretty quickly, and you might get an athlete that deals with some minor hypoglycemia. So you're just keeping food in the system to kind of tick them over, so to speak, and make sure they stay good to go. Obviously pre-stage, you're going to look at, a pump up before you go on. So many people kind of start this way too early. I've seen people, and I've done it myself, hours before they're going out, literal hours. And they're like, doing sets of 50 push-ups and doing all these band curls and banded laterals. And I'm like, what are we doing here? You don't get on stage for a few hours. So again, mimicking the workout scenario, because when do we look best in the gym? Probably about the middle of our workout, like right when the pump's hitting nice, right? That's usually our sweet spot, right? So again, I want to mimic that. So I will use, a non-stimulant pre-workout, just because that's what I prefer to use. I prefer to control my stims through like coffee. I don't really mess with stim pre's. So I'm taking a non-stim pre-workout, maybe about 45 to 60 minutes before I think I'm going to get on stage. I may throw a little bit extra salt in that, some Himalayan pink salt, just for a little bit extra sodium on the day of the show. It can't hurt. I see guys, really down in a ton of salt or this or that. I may just throw a few extra twists in my pre-workout. And then I start, a gentle pump up of just like some push-ups, some bicep curls with a band, some lateral raises, to where I try to kind of ramp myself up to be like, okay, as I'm about to walk on stage, I'm sort of close to halfway through a session, not to the same level of fatigue, of course, but enough where I'm catching a pretty good pump. And then, the posing should kind of take care of the rest, because, you don't want to tire yourself out before you go on stage. So once then you start posing, that's when you kind of pick up the rest from there. And backstage management just as a whole can be daunting, because this is actually going to be a funny story. So I've brought a lot of family members into competing, a couple being my wife and my mother. So in 2020, actually, the Mr. America show that I was, fortunate enough to win in my division was my mom's first show, and she did the amateur masters bikini division. And we get backstage, and she was, kind of confident all leading up to that, whatever. We get backstage, and she is just deer in the headlights, just looking around at everybody. And I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "Everybody looks so good." And I looked at her deadpan. I said, "You're at a freaking bodybuilding show. What did you expect? Like, would you expect everybody to look horrible? Of course they look great. They're all tanned and lean. Unfortunately, she was looking at some cream of the crop competitors when she said that, but it kind of made her chuckle though. Like, okay, yeah, this is the environment I'm supposed to be in. So backstage management can get tricky because you get in your own head a little bit. So that's why it is good if you do have a coach. Hopefully it's within close proximity where they can be back there, or you just have a friend, a family member, somebody. I always bring my wife backstage because I just need somebody there to kind of keep me, just a second set of eyes in terms of management of time, because time can get away from you a little bit. The show might be running faster than expected, or, somebody to just tell you where the bathrooms are, because your mind is thinking about so many different things. You just kind of want somebody there just as an extra set of hands to, be there for you, because your head can really start to get in your own way a little bit. And I have seen this affect people's presentation in the sense of they lose confidence backstage because they're looking around at other competitors and, not realizing that those other competitors are probably looking at you too. But, you're seeing things from your own lens and their confidence just plummets. And, I saw them looking bang on backstage, and now I'm at the judge table looking at them like, that's not the same physique I just saw backstage, because now I see it in their face. Their confidence is definitely down. So the whole backstage management of just timing of things and, just the rush that it can kind of be, because it's a very hurry up and wait environment. You'll have people yelling at you that it's 10 minutes to get on stage. You're pumping up real fast, and you realize you check the roster, you see what class is on stage. You're like, I got like 45 minutes. Like, why are they rushing me? Like, they're just rushing you to stand over here instead of over there. So it's just knowing somebody to look at you and just say, all right, you're still fine. Like, you're good. You have time. So backstage management of just mental preparation and timing is huge. And I think an often very undervalued aspect of competing.
Now, those are honestly great. I didn't even realize how much mental battle, I guess, could go on back there. I do have one question about the pump up, though, because I've personally noticed this myself, that certain muscles actually look worse with a pump. One of those particularly being the quads. So is there a recommendation of what muscles you should pump up and which ones you should probably stay away from if you're trying to bring your best on stage?
So tried and true are the three that I mentioned. Go ahead, Juan. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just about to ask that same question. It was going through my head
Yeah.
too.
No, tried and true is your little circuit of push-ups, lateral raises, and bicep curls. For me, I find that that's like the golden three. You really don't need much more than that, because you're right. A leg pump will blur a lot of detail. I find that the same happens for back as well. And plus, when you're doing anything to pump up your back backstage, unless you find like a frame under a bleacher or something really sturdy to do like a standing row from, you're probably doing something bent over, and then your lower back might start to like get a little iffy, or at least mine does, because I'm an old man. So then my lower back just decides to get creaky, and if I'm super lean anyway, my joints already don't feel that great. So I don't want to start doing a bunch of bent over banded rows and bent over reverse flies, and then my lower back decides to play fizzle on me. The triceps tend to get enough from the push-ups where I don't need to do like separate work. So really all you need to take with you backstage is one or two resistance bands that are, ready for a lateral and a bicep curl. Maybe I'll throw some hammers in just because I'm feeling spicy, but that's really all you need. I find that guys will literally put themselves through an entire workout backstage, and that's not what you want either, because you want a gentle pump, because if you go too far down that line, there's two things that could happen. One, your posing could go to hell in a handbasket because you're just tired now, and now you can't pose. We've all encountered that. We try to pose post-workout, and you can't effectively because, you're too pumped to pose at that point. And then issue two that kind of couples with that, you only have so much muscle glycogen to play with at that point. So if you expend all that doing your backstage circuit, you're a dead duck when it comes to posing, and you don't have anything to continue that pop going. And then I've seen this time and time again as well, because people maybe mistimed their carb load, they're pumping up, or let's say they don't have enough water in their system and they're like, oh, I'm not getting a pump. I'm not getting a pump. So they start eating a bunch of carbohydrates when they really should probably just take a couple sips of water and chill out for a second. So that's, again, where that whole backstage management thing comes into play. And obviously the days leading up to that, maybe they cut their water out all day on Friday. So of course you're not going to get a pump Saturday because you don't have any fluid to pump things around. Like, where do you think it's going to come from? So obviously all those things kind of tie together, but yeah, that's the long and the short of the pump up. It's pretty vanilla, pretty basic.
Well, that's good to hear. I guess I was onto something before the 8th grade pool parties back in 2013.
You had it all figured out.
Yeah.
I did want to bring up that, I mean, I've noticed, at least for me, it's like sometimes when I get a pretty big pump in my triceps, they don't look as good. They just look like inflamed arms sometimes. And I was like, well, that's weird. I thought it's just supposed to look better. Like, the pump makes everything look better. But in reality, it doesn't. And then that's why I brought up the question, or Jack brought it up, where I was like, well, is it true that sometimes a pump can actually hinder your appearance on stage with the lighting and stuff, just because it can make you look a little more, I guess, inflamed, or just a little bigger on certain areas that you don't want the lighting to cut through. Um, but I think this leads pretty well into posing itself, because a lot of people think that it's easy, and I can't pose. I really can't pose. I tried, like, yeah, you do the basic double, like you tell somebody to flex, you double biceps and stuff like that. But I after seeing your videos and some stuff, like, there's so much detail that goes into it. Like, for example, I think the side post with the chest, it's like little things of bringing, I don't know if you bring the chest down or up. It's like those little things can play with the light and just makes a huge difference. So I don't know if you want to bring up some mistakes that people make when posing, or how difficult it really is, compared to what people may make it sound.
Yeah, for sure. So I know I harped on earlier when it came to the contest prep setting, hire a coach. But if you don't know how to pose, please hire me, hire somebody else, anybody. I don't care. Don't spend 20 weeks in a calorie deficit to then spend 5 minutes on stage fumbling around because you didn't learn how to pose correctly. That is the biggest mistake I see so many people make, is they don't learn how to pose correctly from a professional or somebody that knows what they're doing, that can actually steer you in the right direction. And they end up doing all this hard work, and maybe they have a phenomenal physique, but if you're not presenting it correctly and not presenting it properly, the judges can't score you the way that you think you should be scored, because you're either not posing within the criteria, or you're just showing off your physique in a very poor manner. So it's not displaying itself correctly. So that's a big one. That's a big one for me. And obviously one I harp on, and one I take very seriously, because I do take my posing very seriously. It is a craft, it is an art form, and it's something that I take a lot of pride in. And the one aspect of posing that I love so damn much above anything else, it's the one thing in fitness where we can get instant gratification. Because when you diet for a show, it's going to take 16, 20 weeks to get lean, or you're trying to put on size, that's going to take even longer to really notice a dramatic change in a physique. But if I pose you correctly, I can make your physique change like that. And I think that's so cool, because just by moving a hand or positioning somebody's torso a different way, you can make a dramatically different looking body. And in my early stages of my competitiveness, I probably lost to some guys I should have beat because they outposed me. And then I vowed that that would never happen again. That there's no way I would ever lose a show based on posing. Like, I said to myself, that's something I can control directly. There's, really two things you can kind of control directly: how much body fat you lose and what you end up looking like in that regard. And, you're posing. But for me, the posing was the big one, because that's something you can really directly control. Because somebody's ability to get lean, like, maybe somebody can just dig harder than you, or they just, they are genetically able to get leaner than you. Or somebody genetically has better muscle bellies, or this or that. I can't control that. That's cool. If I lose based on that notion, hats off to that competitor. You nailed it. That's fine. I am not going to lose a show based off of something that I could have controlled by practicing 15 to 20 minutes a few times a week. I'm really nailing my posing. That's just unacceptable to me. And any athlete that works with me, we work on posing very diligently. It's part of my weekly check-ins. So when they send me a video, I'm actually doing a screen record review of their posing, not just, saying like, all right, things look good. Here's the adjustments to the plan. We're working on posing side by side with that. So, I'm stopping their video and pointing things out and, making sure that they're posing correctly per the criteria of their class. So I think posing is it's starting to gain more traction and more importance, but I still think it's the most underappreciated and undervalued aspect of competing, because people think they can just roll up with the best body and win a show. And that may work sometimes, but, eventually that's going to come back to bite you.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, even if you're not competing, everyone should hire Joe, because he can teach you how to pose, and you can sell more workout programs on Instagram with the instant transformation. So that's always
This
a
is
side
true.
benefit.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll up your sales big time there.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's actually a really good point, because you see a lot of people that actually use this tactic, just unposed versus posed in lightings, to sell workout programs. So you guys should go use that tactic, and also point out other people using that tactic, so you can tell people not to buy from them.
So my favorite one, actually, now speaking on that, is when people will do two posed things, but then scale the one that they're trying to sell because they just maybe stood a little closer to the camera. It's like, whoa, this person looks way bigger.
Yeah.
So does their head. So why is that the case? Because
I
they
know,
maybe
right?
just stood a little closer
My
to the
favorite's
camera.
the double mirror.
Oh my
Right.
God. Yeah, it's like, what are we doing here, man? Like,
Yeah, you
that's
got
just
the mirror in the front, and then it shoots to the one in the back, and then it makes you look 3 times bigger.
Yeah, it makes you look 3D because like your reflection's popping through, and it's just like, what are we doing here, man? Like, this
Yeah,
is so misleading. But no, that's that's all funny things that you can do with proper posing and presentation, just unflexed versus flexed.
definitely. Yeah. So, are there any common mistakes that you see people in specific poses that you want to talk about? Maybe people make a common mistake in the side chest or front double Y or whatever it may be.
So I'll go actually two that are just kind of overarching, and they kind of tie together because it's just how we see it. So too many people only pose to a mirror or a front camera on their phone so that they can see what they're doing, and B, it's kind of maybe, or 1A we'll call it, they pose specific to the light that they're standing in with respect to that reflection. So they're not posing true to what would be done on stage. So in a typical stage setting, you're maybe 15-ish feet, 10 to 15 feet from the judge's table, and you're on an elevated surface, right? Because you're on a stage. So judges are going to be down here somewhere, and you're going to be right here. So the absolute best way to practice your posing. Now, I'm going to circle back because I'm not going to say never pose in front of a mirror, because one, it's fun, and two, to make for some fun content, whatever. But the best way to pose if you're getting ready for a competition is to set up your tripod at about hip to belly button height using the back camera. And you want to be, I would say, 8 to 10 feet away from said camera, not using a mirror. You're posing directly to the back camera. This is going to give you the most true, accurate assessment of that distance depth perception on stage. Because, I know I just said that elevated surface. So you would say, why not put my camera on the floor? Well, that's too much of the improper angle of elevation. So what we've kind of found is that, like I said, hip to belly button height on the tripod, using the back camera about 8 to 10 feet away is usually a sweet spot. And you pose to the camera itself. So that's going to give you the most accurate representation of your physique with respect to what it would look like on stage. Too many people pose in front of a mirror only, or only in front of the front camera where they can kind of see their silhouette and reflection. And this leads to you always posing with respect to that and not learning the proprioception of where your body actually is. So if you're never posing without a mirror, because last time I checked, there's no mirror when you're on stage competing, you're never going to learn where the heck you should be. Now, like I said, I'm not saying don't pose in front of a mirror. I still pose in front of a mirror because it's cool and I like to check myself out. And we all do if we're in fitness. We all like to look at ourselves and go like, oh, bicep, and then tell ourselves we're small because, that whole dysmorphic thing. But
Right.
that's just a tongue-in-cheek joke, whatever. But with respect to that as well, you're going to pose to the lighting that you see from the mirror feedback, not how it should actually look. So let's say, the light is casting differently to make you tilt the pose not the way it should be when you're posing properly to that camera in front of you. So it's going to make you develop instant bad habits because you're not displaying yourself correctly with respect to how it would be on stage. So again, if you're looking to compete, golden rule formula is film with the back camera on a tripod that's about hip to belly button height, somewhere in that range, 8 to 10 feet in front of you, you're good to go. That's what you should be practicing with a majority of the time when you're filming yourself. And then what you do is just like any athlete, football, basketball, hockey, baseball, whatever, you then go watch it back. That is your game tape, and that's your film. So you watch it back, you fine-tooth comb it, and the next time you film yourself, you work on those things. Maybe you just have a little notebook, or you have little notes on your phone. So as you're watching, you're like, okay, I need to, move this elbow here. I need to, flex my legs harder here. And that's your notes. Okay, next time you practice posing, those things better be addressed. And then you watch that back again, and you fine-tooth comb it again, and again, and again, and again, and again. You just keep refining it, keep refining it, keep refining it to a point where, you can't get it wrong. It's not a practice till you get a perfect thing. It is a practice till you can't get it wrong.
Oh, that's great. Do you suggest, like, if you've never posed before, to pose in the mirror first to kind of see what it looks like and then transition into the tripod camera method?
Sure. If it's something you've really never done before, maybe I would say, and it's all let's say it's kind of a split of time. So let's say you're first getting into posing. Maybe you spend about 75% of your time in front of the mirror and 25% in front of the back camera. And that would just slowly start to wean away from the mirror. So with a newer athlete, I'm going to put them in front of the mirror maybe more often just so they can see what's going on. But I'm still going to instruct those things of look, don't pose directly to what you see, because you're going to make weird adjustments based on light and things like that. So one of the other kind of sidebars when it comes to posing is, again, while it's fun, don't always pose in amazing lighting, because hands down, you're going to, again, tell yourself that you're leaner than you actually are. Now, I just did it this weekend when we had an open house at one of our new franchise locations for the gym that I work at. They have a posing room, and you're darn right I filmed some content in there because it looks cool for social media. But you must take that with a grain of salt. So in an ideal world, when you pose with more honest lighting, you just want something where it's, light source sort of in front of that back camera tripod, maybe slightly elevated, but anything that's directly overhead is going to really create some freaky shadows. And that's where you see that crazy down lighting that you see in different posing rooms, different gyms. Again, it can create kind of a false narrative of what you actually look like. So you want that light source to be behind your camera. It can maybe be slightly elevated, but if anything, it's just coming from behind the camera. Then there's the camera, and then there's you. If the light source is coming from the side, that's also going to create a lot of cool shadows when you're facing that direction, right? Because you're getting beamed with light. If you've ever posed, I don't know if you guys have done it, but I certainly have for content. If you ever have a spot and the sun is beaming in from the side, so you get a lot of sunlight, and then you turn into that sunlight, man, those shots are crazy, right? But if you always pose looking at those pictures, you're going to get an inaccurate representation. So I think it's actually smart, and I do this to myself as well. I pose in horrible lighting on purpose when I'm prepping.
Bottom up lighting.
Yeah, I pose in crap lighting on purpose, basically just to constantly nerf myself a little bit.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way.
Yeah, and I take those fun videos in super down lighting, even when I'm, getting ready for a show, because it makes for great content. And let's be honest, that's what we're in the business of doing. If we're coaches, we need to make good content, whatever. It is what it is. Everybody does it. But don't use that as your physique assessment, right? It's two different streets. And if you're using it for content, cool. But don't use that as your check-in photo, so to speak. If you're really serious about competing, have a setup, whether it's in your home, in your gym's, studio, whatever it is. Find a setup that makes sense, that you can keep consistent as well, so that you can side by side these pictures and go, you can see accurate visual changes because there's no change in lighting or anything like that. So if you are competing, I'd highly recommend establishing a check-in spot right off the bat and keeping it consistent throughout your prep. That way you can assess pictures side by side. Jack and I kind of joked tongue in cheek again about these coaches that'll post up crazy transformations. And I've seen that one too, where picture A is at the starting point of contest prep in crap lighting, and then picture B is one day out in the hotel with freaky lighting. It's like,
Yep.
whoa, obviously there's change there. The person just prepped for 20 weeks, but man, you made that look a lot more dramatic than meets the eye, because there was crap lighting over here and really crazy lighting over here. And it's just a little disingenuous, in my opinion.
No, I agree. And that's where you get the 2 second transformations too, where you push out your stomach and step one into down lighting and the other one's in the bottom up lighting. And then you just look like a completely different person.
Yep,
It's funny.
absolutely.
Well, I mean, we might be running a little bit out of time, but I do have one more question regarding to the posing. Let's say somebody wants to start posing. Uh, how is there like any way to start? Is like, oh well, let's just start with the double front bicep pose, perfect that one, move on to another one. Is there like different names for certain techniques when you pose, like different planes that you guys go about? Is there like but basically where they can start, like a good area that's pretty easy?
Sure. So the first thing that I would recommend the person do, let's say they're not hiring a coach immediately, because sometimes they might not have the means, the resources to do so, because a good coach should then do research on whatever federation you're competing with, understand their criteria, and be able to deliver service based on that. Let's take the example out of the equation. The person's not working with a coach, they're doing this by themselves. I would first go to the organization's website of the show in question and make sure you understand the criteria, top to bottom, left and right, front and back. Make sure you understand all the mandatory poses that are required per the class that you're competing in, whether it be bodybuilding, classic physique, men's physique, and on the lady side as well, if it's bikini, figure, women's physique, etc. Make sure you understand the posing criteria per the federation that you're competing in, because that could be different as well. If the shows have live streams available on, say, like a YouTube channel, or even if it's local, go to a show within that same federation. I think that's a really undervalued thing that people aren't doing enough. Is, let's say you have an organization that's hosting a show in your area and you're going to do one of their shows 4 months from now. Go spectate, go watch, because that's going to give you your best indicator of what the flow of the day is like, and also what that posing looks like on stage. So that's going to give you your best look. Now, obviously they all have different names and things like that. Speaking to bodybuilding and classic physique, and I'm sure you gentlemen have heard me talk about these before, your quarter turns, they're what is referred to as the symmetry round for these categories. And, they're super important because that's where all the initial assessments are made. So yes, they're assessing for symmetry from top to bottom, left to right, front and back, but that's also the judge's first chance to see you as well. So even before you hit a front double biceps, they're looking at you in those poses and moving people around and trying to find their people that they think might be, first place, second place, and so on. So if you don't nail those introductory poses, that's going to be a problem. And I see that with a lot of guys when they want to start posing. They want to take flight right away. They want to start doing, crazy classic poses, and they want to do the Arnold pose and this and that. And that's great and fun, and you can tinker with those. But if you're serious about competing, you need to start from square one, which are those quarter turns. And I think it's vital to learn those, even for a men's physique athlete. To learn the bodybuilding quarter turns are still pretty vital, even though the posing is pretty different in men's physique. A lot of the footwork is fairly similar. So just learning those initial bodybuilding quarter turns are very valuable. And they also teach you a lot of foundational concepts. So when I'm teaching somebody how to do a double bi or do a side chest or even do an Arnold pose, I'm going to reference back to those quarter turn poses. They're literally the scales before the solo, if we're going to use a music analogy. Like, they are the basic foundational, notes that you have to play before you can start, ripping a solo all by yourself. So you have to learn those as a prerequisite. So I think people that skip those and start going right to, screwing around with all the classic shots are robbing themselves of necessary development that they should have with their posing.
Yeah, that makes sense. I also think a lot of people, especially younger people, that really only see the fancy poses on social media, because those are the ones that people are going to highlight. They're going to highlight their posing routine or whatever it may be. They don't really see the quarter turns unless they're following someone that's documenting their prep. And then when they finally see quarter turns and they try it for themselves, they're humbled to see how small they actually look, because they are honestly not the best for displaying size if you're a small individual. Now, if you're a mass monster, of course, you're going to look big doing whatever you do. But for someone like me, like quarter turns, it's not my best look, but that's just the name of the game. So
Yeah, and like you said, they're not as exciting. So, when people are learning posing and dabbling in, they want to do all those cool shots because they're the ones that look fancy. But, really, I tell competitors all the time, if you don't have good quarter turns, you'll be on the outside of the comparisons when it's time to do favorite classic pose. You're not even going to get looked at. So you need to nail those first and foremost, because that's literally the judge's first impression of you. And, to speak on what you said, yeah, it's not the most flattering shot. It's not for anybody. So that even the guys that have a lot of muscle, they'd still look a lot better in a double bi or a back double bi or a side chest, whatever. They'd look better in a most muscular. So it's comparing everybody on a very level playing field and a very honest comparison to assess someone's physique. And, that's where the judges really start to pick you apart. And again, if you don't nail those, they're not even going to look at you by the time all the fun posing comes around.
those are honestly all great answers, and I want to be cognizant of your time. Juan, did you have any other questions that you were dying to ask?
Uh, no, I think we pretty much hit all the points. I mean, I guess we could end off with a good conclusion on people who are interested in starting to compete and maybe where they can maybe build a little guideline on what they could do first. We could finish it off there.
Yeah. So if somebody's interested in competing, where they go to look, I kind of touched on it in the very beginning. So, if you're looking for, I look at shows in two kind of buckets to at least start: tested versus untested. So, even if you're a natural competitor, you can still compete in an untested show. Just understand that you may be going against people who are using enhancements. Maybe, may not. It's not tested. That's all I'll say in that facet. If you are a natural athlete and you want things to be in a bit more level playing field, there are tested organizations out there. Especially for a first-time athlete, I would just do your homework as far as what shows are accessible for you, because let's be honest, first-time competitor really probably doesn't want to get on a plane and travel. That's more for, like, we'd say, a high-level athlete who's maybe cherry picking certain high-level shows. So the new athlete probably wants to stay within a reasonable driving distance. So it's about maybe doing research as far as what's available in your area, because there's a ton of different tested organizations out there. The AMBF, who's Shirt I'm donning here, we're pretty big in the Jersey area and its surrounding regions. You have the OCB, who's pretty big in the DMV. You have WMBF, who is very big in Boston. NGA, who's very big in Florida. You have the IMBA, PMBA, who's out on the West Coast, the IPUs in the Midwest. So there's a ton of different tested organizations out there that all kind of have their hub. There's shows all across the country every single weekend. So, do your homework. You'll find one that makes sense. Maybe talk to some people at your gym, see who's competed in what. Just start picking people's brains around you to see who's done what where. Recognize once you start asking people questions, they may have a little bit of an agenda. So take every answer with a grain of salt, including mine, because who am I? I'm just another coach on the market. So if you are going to start interviewing coaches, make sure you gel with them on a personality basis. Don't just take the first sales pitch that you hear. If you are interested in coaching, take everybody's consult, see what everybody has to say, and then you can make a more informed decision as a first-time athlete, because especially with the first-time show, you want to get it right. You want somebody who has that valuable experience that's going to lead you down the right path and be honest with you at the same time. Don't take just the first person that tells you, like, yeah, I can get you ready in 12 weeks, no time flat, whatever. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So make sure somebody's genuinely being honest with you when it comes to your competitive region, and they might not give you the answer you want to hear, because they might say, hey, let's spend a little bit more time developing your physique, or hey, let's extend this prep time a little bit longer, because I think you need it. So make sure somebody's giving you a genuine answer. So that's why I say do your homework when it comes to, coaches. Like, when it comes to your house, if you were going to get a new roof, you might call 3 different companies for a quote. That's usually the golden rule. Like, call at least 3 companies, get your quotes. Maybe you make a decision solely based on price, but you might talk to some guy and you're like, the price guy, he's really cheap, but he sounds kind of shady. So I'm going to go with this guy in the middle right here. Do the same with your coach as well. Interview at least 3 different people that you look up to or respect, and make an informed decision that way. But yeah, I guess long-term sentiments there. Do your homework as far as what's available in your area. Make sure you understand the type of show that you're getting into, whether it's tested versus untested. So that way you know what the playing field is. Coming there. Do some research on the organization's website. To really understand guidelines, criteria, and again, if shows, if that organization has shows in your area, even if it's a little bit of a drive, take a weekend and go. Why not make a fun out of it? You and a couple friends go up to a show, watch it, see how it flows. You might watch that show and say, there ain't no way in hell I'm doing that, right? And it might not be for you. So without going to one, I think that's really kind of robbing yourself of like seeing it firsthand. So I think that's really the best way to kind of get a gauge, is just to go.
Yeah, that's great advice. And pretty much what we're getting at here is you should hire Joe as a coach for your competition endeavors, whether that's posing or it's full competition prep or Gen Pop, whatever it may be. You should hire him. We're going to put all your socials in the description. Do you have anything coming up that you would like to promote?
For myself, no. This is a year to my athletes. So I've been competing every year since 2016, and this is finally time for me to just take a backseat this year with my wife and I having our baby, who's going to be 6 months this Saturday. So probably, by the time this comes out, so we got a new baby in the house. I went through a recent change where, long story short, I was actually owning a gym, but we decided to close down. So now I'm just doing training and coaching, which is what I love to do anyway. So I'm very happy to be doing just that and solely that now. So I work out of a phenomenal gym called Wolf Fitness down here in South Jersey, where I take care of my in-person clients, and my online clients are taken care of just through my own branding of JQ Physique Coaching. And loving life, being a dad, being the best husband I can be, and being the best coach for my clients. So, going to be at all kinds of different events in the New Jersey and surrounding areas throughout the late summer and fall. So I'm just excited to be wearing the coaching cap this year. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, that's super exciting. So we'll put all your links in the description, and if anyone is interested in your coaching, please be sure to hit you up. Or I guess we're available for coaching too, even though different skill sets there. And I hope everyone enjoyed the podcast. If you enjoyed the content, please leave a like, comment, or a review on any of the platforms. And hopefully we can get Joe back on here again for a different discussion. That'd be great. Hope you guys all enjoyed it. See you next time.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. This is great.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us.